Yeah, we're live. Excuse me. Today we want to talk about dyno results, since that's kind of what I do and have done for a living for the last, I don't know, I think it's been like 3 decades now. It's been a long time. But more specifically, I mean, relates directly to providing the dyno information like I do. So when we do a comparison of cylinder heads or camshafts or intake manifolds, or when you're just comparing two different combinations, hey, we ran a naturally aspirated one and then we put a blower or turbo on it, and here's what it did, or when we're doing E85 comparisons, or all of those things. But what I want to talk about is that it's always important to get accurate dyno data. And so we're going to talk about that. But it's even more critical when you're talking about things where there will be subtle differences. And so this I came across this a lot when I was doing Engine Masters, the Engine Masters Challenge, where the idea was to make, in that particular instance, when I was doing it, we had 410-inch motors. And then they took the average horsepower over a given RPM range and average torque and added those two numbers together. I think that maybe they divided by 2 or something and got some sort of number. So they went through great steps to, what they're trying to do was make the thing, seemingly valuable, the motor over a broad range. And so peak horsepower, not as critical, peak torque, not as critical, but power everywhere was kind of the thing. So the interesting thing is that when you look at the results for the different years of Engine Masters, because it went on for a long time, you had a lot of guys that did very well that made very similar numbers. In fact, the difference between first and second was often like less than 1 horsepower. So they're taking this to the decimal point level, which, given the differences in these motors, the difference in configurations and the way that they were averaging these numbers and stuff, that's pretty close when you're looking on that side of the decimal point. So it's important for these things to be accurate. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how to, things that are necessary when they're doing stuff like this. First of all, excuse me, all of the normal things. So when you're doing a test and you're comparing cylinder heads or camshafts, intake manifolds, turbos, whatever you're doing, when you're comparing two things, what you want to do is isolate that variable. So that has to be the thing that makes the change in the power output. So all the other things need to stay the same. So if you're running something, airfield has to be the same, timing has to be the same, the temperature, the water temperature has to be the same, the oil temperature, the air temperature would be ideal. Sometimes that's hard to do given the length of time that it takes to run, particularly if you're doing more than one kind of test. If you're just doing a back-to-back test and it doesn't take a whole bunch of time to make the swap in whatever you're changing, cylinder head, camshaft, intake manifold, whatever it is, and that's fairly quickly, headers or whatever you want to test, and you can get that done, and there isn't a big change in what the temperature is of the ambient air that you're using, outside air, whatever it is. They have dyno cells that are, climate controlled, and it could be the same every time, which is nice. And so if you're looking for nitpicky kind of things, that's very, very important. So all of those things have to be important. But what I want to talk about a little bit about anyway is in these things like with Engine Master. So when we were doing Engine Masters, we're running from 1 RPM to another RPM, and they're taking the average number between 1 RPM and another RPM and the average power and torque that it produced in that range. So that's very important. So what becomes very important when you're doing this is obviously that you've tuned the thing correctly and all those variables are adjusted or optimized, or you just make sure that they're all the same when you're doing the test. But also what the dyno is doing is important. And actually, when you're doing a test like that, everything would remain the same. Like I said, all the variables would remain the same. The acceleration rate, the oil temperature, water temperature, air temperature, all of those things have to stay the same. And you don't normally change that at all during the thing, unless that's your test. So if you want to test at 300 RPM or 600, and you can range it from 50 RPM, I think on the dyno for Westech, you can have it go as slow as 50 RPM. And I've done that by mistake. It takes a really, really long time to go through a sweep, to where I've seen as much as 1500 or 1600 RPM. So it just goes, whoop, makes a really quick zing through there, almost like a free rev. Because, if you're talking about going from, let's say 3,000 to 6,000 RPM, you're doing a 3,000 RPM spread and you're doing 1,500 RPM per second. That run takes 2 seconds. And so it's really, really fast. And a lot of times they do that on very high horsepower stuff. But normally when we run stuff, we run it at 300 RPM per second. So all those things need to stay the same. But the way that you do the test is also important. So I want to talk about that a little bit. So let's say like on Engine Masters, we were running from 3,000 RPM to 7,000 RPM. And that's where we were taking your average. So you load it at 3,000 RPM, release it, let it go to 7,000 RPM, and the dyno pulls it back down, and you take the average horsepower, you take the average torque, and you divide by 2 or whatever they did. But you're taking that average. One of the things that Engine Masters, the TV show, and Steve Brule in particular, since he was running the dyno, one of the things that he did that I liked is that he would make 3 runs and then take an average of those 3 runs. So he would run one, they would stabilize the stuff. He'd do another one, they stabilize stuff, do the other one, stabilize it. Sometimes he would just do 3 in a row, as long as the starting point is the same on all of them. And then you do the procedure exactly the same each time, as long as all of those things are the same for every variable that you're trying to test, then that all works out. And I like the taking the average of 3 runs like Steve did, because I think it gives you, not just a single snapshot of one run, but hey, look, it does this thing over and over again. You can look at all 3 and go, hey, there was the variation of 1 or 2 horsepower or 10 or 20 or whatever it was. Hopefully it's not that much. If that is the case, then you have a big problem. But if it's 1 or 2 horsepower between runs and you average it at 3, I think you get a better picture of what's actually happening. And he was very good at that. And I like that. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is, and again, this goes back to the reality of like in these Engine Masters competitions, where you see a difference of like 1 horsepower could be, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 worth of money in these Engine Masters challenge things. Because I forgot what first place was, but it was a lot. And so a guy that loses out by half a horsepower or 1 horsepower or whatever, the other things that I'm going to talk about can make a big difference. So for instance, if we're taking an average from 3,000 to 7,000 RPM, we're doing a sweep through that RPM range. One of the things that's very important to me is that when you do the test, every test has to be exactly the same. So you've got to load it. And what I like to do, and what Steve did, was you would load it, let it stabilize for a second or 2, and then release it. Because what you want is as you're rolling into the throttle, the dyno is basically grabbing the motor and not letting it rev any higher than whatever your start RPM is, like let's say 3,000 RPM. So it's grabbing the dyno or grabbing the motor and pulling it down and holding it at that RPM. Well, you'll see, if you look at the display, you'll see fluctuations in power output. So until that number just reads kind of a solid number, then you release it. That's the starting number. And this becomes ultra critical. And then the way that it pulls the motor back down, because you don't want to just let it, free rev and zing up. So it pulls the motor back down at the top. So the dyno is doing that. So you want it to do that every time. Your starting temperatures, all those are going to be the same. And then you want the dyno procedure, and the load-in procedure is very important. And this is particularly the case if you're using that first load-in number as the start for your average power production. So if you load in and you load in very quickly and then release it right away, you're going to get a different number at the starting point and a different beginning part of the curve than you would if you loaded it in and let it stabilize. And I've seen that happen a lot when we're testing there. And so one of the things that I like to do in this situation is that, and also for this reason, when you do a load-in number, that number is not accurate. So whatever your starting load-in number is, and then you release it, like let's say we were loading it at 3,000, then you release it, that number is artificially high, because a stationary load number is different than a sweep, than that same number had you just swept through that. So what I like to do is, if you're taking an average from 3,000 to 7,000, I think you get a more accurate reading if you start the load in a few hundred RPM before that point. So you're getting an inaccurate number at that load in point, again, because it's a stationary load. But as it sweeps through that 3,000 RPM, and then what I would do also is do the same thing on the other end. I'd have it sweep past 7,000 to like 7,300 and then have it pull off at 7,300. So that when you're taking your average power readings from 3,000 to 7,000, like they do in Engine Masters, that the beginning point and the end point can't really be altered by what's going on with the dyno. Because we'll see this when we do a stationary load as our start point and then release it. Sometimes you'll see a dip and then a recovery because that stationary number is like artificial. Now, if you're doing all of them the same, they're all getting an artificial number there. But I just don't like the variation in that. Like I said, the dyno operator can actually make a change in what the outcome is of the beginning part of that power curve by the way that he loads it and releases it. And so the amount of time that's spent there on that stationary load, if he's just rolling in and releases it, maybe it wasn't making as much power as it does when there's a full stationary load. Maybe it's making less or more, and then you release it. And so it's not as consistent as if you do it the other way. Let's have it sweep through, because as it's sweeping through, you're not going to have any variation. As it's sweeping through, have it sweep through both ranges, high and low, your starting point and your end point, have it sweep through both of those, and then take those average numbers. I just think that that's a lot more accurate. And that way, when you're doing these averages, particularly, like I said, Engine Masters, if less than 1 horsepower as an average was the difference between you getting $80,000 and then $10,000, that's a big amount. And if the we're all, because we're racers and stuff, that everybody's going to complain about stuff like that. But like an Engine Masters, if you think that happened, or you're projecting that happened, this would eliminate that as a possibility. So if you're do the sweep through the start and stop RPM range, I just think it's a better way to go. So that's one of the things that you can do, so that there's no operator error manipulation in that. Obviously, if the guy's been doing dyno testing a long time, he can do lots of other stuff to manipulate that if he's a not a good person, or is wanting somebody to win, or maybe it's his guy or whatever. If I didn't ever see any of that in Engine Masters. I didn't see not that I don't know, I was only there for 1 year, but I didn't see really any favoritism or that kind of thing. But this way, if you do a procedure that there's no way that can be affected, sweeping through those RPM ranges, I just think is a better way. And then if you then add on top of that, like Brule does, where you do 3 of those runs, you're going to get what the motor does. And then hopefully anything that you see as a difference between this thing that you're testing, this intake manifold, and another intake manifold, another intake manifold, another intake manifold, as long as you're conscientious about what you're doing, the differences that you see should be differences. And quite honestly, for a lot of these things, even though in Engine Masters and stuff, you see potential for it to be a big amount of money in that competition, because it was a big amount of money, the difference between first and second and third place or whatever, you have a fairly big amount of money. But in normal dyno testing, like I'm doing, if I'm doing a stock cam versus a low buck truck camshaft, or truck Norris or Chupacabra or whatever, we put that camshaft in, the fact that it made a 60 horsepower gain or a 61 horsepower gain doesn't make any difference. It's that much. It's so big of a change that it's just nothing but good. And the 60 versus 61 would only be something that I would be concerned about if like when I was, if you were in Engine Masters and the difference between that 1 horsepower could mean the difference between thousands and thousands of dollars. So I think that all of that stuff is very important. And like I said, there are ways to get around that and make it right for the results and for posterity and all that. So we'll see what you guys got going on. So start a poll. And I realized that the thumbnail is upside down. Again, like I told you, sometimes I get these photos, and unless I send them back to my phone, which my son now has fixed for me, I have to send them through my phone. I have to wash them through my phone and then send them back and put them up. So I'll go ahead and fix that upside down photo. But it's just a shout out to the guys in Australia, because that's like nothing but good. What is the... Okay, does the dyno test give you real world results? I love real world stuff because it's so real world. Dennis Jet, what's going on? Rich, BMW. Good afternoon, Richard. I'm hoping I can find my oil pressure issue this evening and do a first start of my 6-liter. Yeah, let me know if you get it running, Garrett, and send me an idle clip if you get one. Anyone know where I can get the cast lid to the Holley ultra low LS intake manifold? I've been able to find it in a billet aluminum. Anyone know where I can find the more affordable cast one? Doesn't Holley sell that? Richard, why did the cam that one do so well? Are you asking about the Eric's thing? Is that what cam you're talking about? Scott, 20 thumbs up. That's what we like. Throw them thumbs up there. Sounds like dyno results will be better understood based on application. I'm not sure I know what you mean. You mean doing dyno tests based on whether it's a drag race motor or a road-based motor? Are you talking about that kind of application? Load in 28 degrees. At least a few hundred RPM before. Can you do a belt-driven vacuum pump and electric test? Yeah, first I'd like to see if a vacuum pump. A lot of times we've tested vacuum pumps in the past, and sometimes the vacuum pumps don't do anything, whether it's electric or not. And sometimes they do. I think that's more of a function, I think, of the ring package than anything. Richard, this is the reason I started following you on your OCD when it comes to the testing results. Are spot on. I remember the BTR results. You could not produce the same numbers as advertised. I don't know which one you're talking about. What BTR cam and results? When I worked at Landed C, we were doing average numbers. We're doing a range today. We'd always start around 500 RPM before that range, and we'd hold the engine there for 2 to 5 seconds. Yeah, as long as you stabilize it so that it's not fluctuating. And when you do a stationary load, if you let it sit there, it just stays there, and then you can release it. But you don't want to have it sit there too long, also, because then you could see the number start dropping a little bit. You questioned BTR and the results. You will post the most honest results I think that anyone doing your test. I haven't ever found BTR to be dishonest about their results. Brian's a great guy and one of the most honest guys I've found in this industry. Jordan, melted number 7 piston in my Forge LQ4. Also got the cylinder in the process, looking for a new block. What did you do? Was it too much timing or on the fuel, or what was the deal? Got a Gen 453 BTR Stage 4 truck cam. What should I program my transmission to shift at for maximum performance? It's a 5.3 that you have. I can tell you where that made peak power at, but I don't know how. Is this a 4L80E transmission? Excuse me, because that's not going to be. Here we go. I don't know how well that's going to take the high RPM shift. Somebody else might know on the 5.3. BTR truck cams. Okay, let's go to our stage 4. So there's a bunch of stage 4 there. Stage 4 was looking like it was 62 or 6,300 is where it made peak power at. Yeah, so it's not terribly high. Do you lose advantage of long runner EFI low end torque in a boosted 302 application? Not if you're blowing through the long runner intake manifold. Like if you got a Vortex supercharger or a Paxton or ProCharger or Torque Storm, and you're blowing through whatever this long runner intake manifold that you're talking about, all that stays the same. Cam, I don't know what you mean by thoughts. Turned up boost to 17 to 18 pounds. Had a fuel table that I missed. Added timing, 5 degrees of timing for a total of 19 at 18 pounds at 5,300. Is 5,300 near the torque peak? And it was this on pump gas? Cam, I don't really look at things in terms of horsepower to weight ratio. I would look at that stuff if I'm looking at something like a specific application. So for road racing, we always wanted the most power that we could have and the lightest car that we could have. But it was really hard to get both of those things. But 10 to 1's a pretty fun car. So 2,000 pounds and 200 horsepower kind of thing. Or 3,000 pounds and 300 horsepower. But I think that the ratio doesn't work as well as you start going up in weight. Did you CD test the Mustang for top speed? No, I never had it in a wind tunnel, if that's what you mean. Is there any gain in putting a 92 millimeter throttle body on a 5.3 with a Trailblazer SS? As compared to what? As compared to the stock one? Probably not. You probably aren't making enough power to utilize all of what the stock Trailblazer 90 millimeter throttle body does. Near torque peak and on pump gas, 10 to 1 compression. Yeah, it's not surprising that it would let go, right? Time clocks a mile per hour never lie. They actually do quite often, especially ET. There's a sweet spot for nice power because of all the motorcycle engine technology. A lot of times what we do is we do utilize the entry load to equalize tests. So the engine was run at the same temperature every time. Many times coolant simply would be 40 degrees and oil would be 200. Yeah, we to get the oil temperature up, we certainly will load the thing, maybe a few times to get oil temperature and sometimes water temperature also to get those up to our starting temps that we want to start the load at. Todd, I saw the email data. I can't open the log. I don't think. Maybe I'll try to send it over to my laptop and see, or open it with my laptop and see if I can do that. .300 horsepower and 3,000 pounds, is like a Mustang, a lightweight LX with a modified 302. That'd certainly be fun, but not, not as fun as a 400 horsepower one would be. But 300 wheel horsepower would be good if that's the metric that you're using. 300 flywheel horsepower would not be as fun. It's still good. It's still better than a stock one, but 300 wheel horsepower in a Mustang is definitely fun. One of the things to consider is I've seen a lot of guys argue back and forth about this on various groups and stuff, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I want to." I remember really wanted a Lotus Esprit for a long time before I got my other car, and it's a cool car. The Lotus has always been about being lightweight, and it had a reasonably powerful motor, and so you get what you get with a lightweight car and a reasonable amount of power is a pretty quick car. And one that can handle well and brake well and stuff. The problem is, for me anyways, is that I was always about top speed. And a lightweight car with a modest amount of power is not going to have a top speed. It's not going to have a good top speed. Doesn't matter how light it is. It's just not, it's going to be an aero thing versus the power. And so it's not going to go very fast. It will be quick up to whatever point that is where aero drag starts becoming a problem. And then you have issues with having enough power. Of course, with the Lotus Elise, you could always, or well, not on the Spree, but a Lotus Elise, you could always swap a K series or some sort of supercharger, turbocharged 4-cylinder thing in there. I only have 91 octane here in Canada. What's a good additive if I can put in to bring it up? There are some additives. I don't know what's available in Canada. There are some of these octane boosters. I don't know how well the stuff that you would just go buy in the regular store works. I've heard that those are not that good in changing the octane. But there are some that I see that guys advertise. Somebody else throw out the names of those. They probably have used them. Boostain or some of those. Top Fuel's trying to go 10-1 the other way. Yeah. Does the dyno test give you real world results? I think it gets you close, but the weight of the car and the compression ratio are a factor that the engine dynos I don't think can account for. Well, they definitely account for compression because compression is just power. So it's easy to account for that on the dyno. But yeah, I don't think that it does what you would need to do for vehicle weight and gearing and stuff. When you run a dyno and a gear other than 1-to-1, is there a formula to bring in a line? I actually haven't seen. That's a good question. I haven't seen one that equates that because I know that when we do change it, it definitely changes the power. And maybe I should try to figure out one. I would think that there would be one already, but would having too much fuel contribute to me melting a piston? I had it in the 10s. Probably not. Yeah, I don't know what's a top fuel build. Do you know what's a top fuel car weigh? Let's say they're making 10,000 horsepower. They don't weigh 1,000 pounds, right? They got to weigh more than that. But they're not going to be real heavy. But that's another good example of even if the top fuel or if a top fuel dragster is really, really light, it has a lot of aero drag because they're trying to put downforce on it so that they can get traction. And we see that at Bonneville too. 2,300 pounds is what they weigh. Okay. That's really light. They have lightweight and all the power. They have everything that they need, which is very cool. Any big downside to gapping rings is it 0.009 times cubic inch? I don't know what that is. I've never used that formula. We do 6.5 thousandths per 1 inch of bore because it's determined by the bore size. It's not determined by displacement. VP Octanium. Okay, maybe that's the other one I was thinking of, but I don't know what it's made of or what it leaves. An orange powder residue on everything. And from what I've heard, it's hard on rings. Are there any really light V8 engines? I don't know. I don't know what an aluminum Cosworth or something. Modular setups weren't $200 and way more complicated than the lid. Some were made with burst plates. At 300 miles an hour, the rear wing makes somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 to 6,000 pounds of downforce. It's a lot. They're trying to put that because they have more power than they have traction. So they're trying to add traction. Isn't it aluminum? I don't know, Sean. Do you know what aluminum LS weighs compared to a K series? Do you know what octane I should be running at 11-1 with 5.3 with 29 degrees of timing? I know what we run. We run 91. You could also run 93. It also depends on your water temperature. I know my engine's only 450 pounds. So you can just pick it up and carry it around. That would be nice. Aluminum blocks are nice. I like the L33 stuff. I like it a lot better than the iron blocks. I don't know that I could pick up a short block. KM Dingo, a South African YouTuber, dies 1 month after getting bit by a venomous snake. Well, what did he get bitten by? Do you know? K20 only weighs 27 or 275 pounds. Is the K20, are those aluminum blocks? Oh, a green mamba. And a green mamba is not even, I don't think is as bad as other snakes. Obviously it's bad, but K20s are aluminum blocks. Okay. I don't know why I was thinking that those are iron blocks. It'd make more sense that they're aluminum. Are the J series, are those aluminum blocks? There. All LS with accessories. Who runs that? Accessories. Fair. J is aluminum. Okay. Highly venomous snake of the mamba genus. Coastal regions of southern East Africa. They sure are pretty. Almost 2 meters, too. That's pretty big. Contains both neurotoxins and cardiotoxins, with symptoms that can include dizziness, swelling at the bite, difficulty breathing. The green mambas are quite shy and prefer to avoid confrontation. The black mambas, not so much. Is an 8.1 configuration as strong as the LS World? No, what do you mean by that? My air conditioning is 2 windows down. If you're old enough to remember wing windows, the little vent windows, my brother in his Firebird had those. It was 67, so it had the wing windows. Suzuki G13B is only 115 pounds complete. G10 is only 75. That's for the block? Black mambas will chase you. They will, and they're fast too. And they raise up like cobras. J is aluminium. Richard, looking to convert an 800 Holly to E85. Any rule of thumb for a starting point on jetting or jet increase flow by 27%-ish? You can, but the numbers are not going to increase by that amount. You got to get the flow rate. Magnesium Chevy small block, 36 pounds. Did they make magnesium blocks? USN. I ran the Holley. What is it? Their 500. What is the 4412? But the XP version of that. We ran that on that 6-cylinder as a blow through with the 85, and I just put 100 jets in it and kind of hope for the best. The Hayabusa V8's 300 pounds. So what is that, like a 2.5 or 2.6 liter or something? Those are kind of cool. What's our poll doing? Does the Dyno test give you real world results? 54% saying no, 46% saying yes. I like stable fuel for fuel storage. Yeah, I've heard that stuff works good. Guys put that in their motorcycles, and I guess if you have a gas tractor and stuff, but they have the diesel stable too, right? That's for the entire thing. Oil pan, intake manifold, cam swab, rockers, lifters, and push rods on stock 302 truck. What else recommended for cheap and effective? If I get a hydraulic roller 5 liter from the wrecking yard, I don't ever change the lifters. We reuse the stock lifters because those work really well. If you want to clean them and re-oil them, that's fine. But we reuse all of that stuff in the spider assembly and all the dog bones and stuff. One of the things you might want to look at is the timing chain. And the lifters are a good keep because they're not cheap. I mean, if you try to replace the lifters, that's no joke. So whenever we do cam swaps, we just keep reusing the lifters. GM cast them in 62 for Mickey Thompson. Yeah, I would put a double roller timing chain in it. I wouldn't put an adjustable one in there, just like a Magnum unit or something. I'm sure somebody else makes some Pioneer or whoever, but we always used to get the comp stuff. That's back when it was more affordable. Max, I saw the Nissan version. There's a couple of I think that their 3-cylinder was bigger than a 1 liter though, right? Was it 1.5 or something? Can you induce load on an engine dyno? Yeah, that's how they work. Uh-oh, McDonald's burgers causing trouble. Crowder said they have more cores in stock. We're seeing supply levels getting better, or did I just get lucky with timing? I don't know. Hard to tell from just one purchase. Gen 453 has a timing chain tensor. Can I delete it? I've never seen one on a 5.3. But if it has one, you can. Nissan just threw one of the most innovative engines in a weird three-wheeler, stopped the racing program, and never elaborated again. Onions are causing listeria? Makes you wonder what the process was, or if they're treating it with something. Richard, I CC'd some LS heads I have, some stock, some modified. I have one set of milled 799s in particular that checked in at 58 cc's. My question is test versus my current 862s. So you're gonna take your 862s off and then run those 799s? And are you going to do that on a chassis dyno? I honestly think you're going to be doing a big change, like a head swap in a vehicle for nothing, because I don't think you're going to see very much there. But I'm always up for getting more data. Blue collar, it's your test, man. You get to do it however you want. Equalizing the compression doesn't do anything for those heads because they're not the same head. So why would you choose to equalize the compression? Why don't you equalize the valve size or the port size or the chamber or the head flow or whatever? You could choose any of those criteria. And when I likely do test, should I find head gaskets? Okay. The RSGR is a 1.6 liter. Yeah, that's the Toyota version, right? I don't think it is an 862. Did you measure the 862s that you have? Do you flow match injectors or just verify that they flow? You can't really change the fuel flow of the injector other than by cleaning the injector. So all you're doing is trying to match a set, to pair a set, so that they all flow the same, assuming that you have a bunch of them to choose from. There's no adjustment knob on them that allows you to change the flow rate. Dyno is a laboratory, in the car is real world. I would argue that in the car is not repeatable enough to be of very little scientific use, because it's hard to isolate variables. Did you upgrade fuel injectors on your Mustang to EV6? The EV6, are you just talking about the plug style for that? Back in my Mustang, when we were doing that, we had 19s in it, and then 24s, and then 30s, and then 36s. I think 36s was as big as we went until we put that motor on the dyno. And then we put something bigger in there. But I didn't care about the plug style, like an EV6. I didn't care about that because we were just using, for me, that would be a more function of what injector harness we're using to match it to the injector. I was just always more concerned about the flow rate of the injector. There's no 862s would compare to milled 799 heads. That's 11-to-1 compression with good flowing heads. Maybe you haven't seen test results. I grabbed a spare 862. It checked in pretty much at 61 cc's as advertised. Yeah, because when I CC'd the 799s and the 706 heads, they were only different by about 2 or 2.5 cc's. It wasn't very much. Single pinhole hole. Oh, the flow you're saying is different. How far will 120 injectors get you on a V8 with E85? I think you get to 1,000 horsepower with that. Would there be any part in the ultra low ram series by Holley that could be blocked off at the top of an open side entry, lower plenum, ultra low, series black. I haven't been able to find the cast black lid. Would there be any part of the ultra low series by Holley that could be blocked off at the top? Blocked off by what? What is it you're talking about? And why are you using an ultra low RAM? Are you running like really, really high RPM? Is it a hood clearance issue? Like what is the what's the reasoning behind that? Usually fitment and RPM are the choice for that. Checked a random stock 799, got 66.5. That seems like way too much. Are Rife engine sensors worth the extra cost? I don't know what that is. I don't recognize that name. Is that a manufacturer? The particular head came off of a 2008 Tahoe. Even without milling the head, you probably could do that. I'd need to do the math on it. You could probably do it just by adjusting the well, but that would change quench, and everybody would get up in arms about that. Uh, 60cc seems like a good size for a performance head. Yeah, if you can get one down to 58 or in the 50s, that's pretty good. When sourcing cold side plumbing, there's so much aluminum tubing out there available for like from CX Racing and all of these places that are online. We just get the aluminum tubing there. Summit has a bunch of stuff too. I made 1,091 on my 120 pound injectors with 80% ethanol. Injectors got to 94%. Everyone says the dyno reads high. Just curious. It's always that they ask you what it will do so that they can tell you that there was something different. I wonder why that's doing that. Another set of 2010 Silverado. Likely going to grab one and see what I get. Core shift through the years. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if there was a difference between 799s and 243s. I thought that they were the same, but I don't know. Rife is a manufacturer. They're supposed to be more precise than OEM sensors. So they're more precise than an OEM like crank sensor or cam sensor or something. I don't know when you get to the point where that's an issue. So like let's say that you have a cam sensor or a crank sensor that would make your timing be off by 1/10 of a degree. Is that anything? Is that significant? Turbo exhaust plumbing, coat, paint the inside and outside of the headers. Coating the inside and outside will definitely make them last longer. If you only coat the outside, the life expectancy is not going to be nearly as high. Yeah, it'd be hard to. I think that Dennis said that OEMs do a lot of research more than anybody in the aftermarket does. And the interesting thing, though, is I guess you could make an argument that they're also cost conscious. So it has to be right. And it has to be right for the right amount of money, too. And I'm sure that there's balancing there. I have some 243s. Never checked them before. I had them imported, unfortunately, and the 243s I have are Castech versions from a 2008. Are there different versions of the 243s as well? I have a couple sets of 799s. I have the set that came off of the L33, which I've never CZ'd. And then I have the other set that came off the LC9. When do turbo headers start to glow? When you don't have enough timing. Did you ever well, actually, even when you do have enough timing, if you turn the lights off, the headers will be glowing, even on just a normal run. Did you ever test those adjustable timing chain sprocket that goes on the crank of an LS? The one that has different slots to change the timing? That works. It works like it does in any other motor. How do you determine if a car will benefit from a shorter intake runner overall, not just for peak, for a road race application? You just have to dyno test it and see if in the RPM range where you're running it, like in a road race thing, wherever your average RPM is spent, that are you making more power there? Blue Collar just got his 10,000 subs. Congratulations, Blue Collar. Rife clamps are built for severe duty and heavy vibration areas. Maybe they're potted differently or stabilized differently. For what I've heard, the earlier 243s were not Castech. If I can, I'll attempt to borrow non-Castech 243s to see if I get a different reading. That'd be interesting to see. Isn't one of those casting procedures supposed to be stronger than the other one? And did either version of that, whichever one that we associate the 706 head with, on a 243, are there some that also are prone to cracking like the 706s are? They never look at you and ask why the engine made less power than expected. They just blame the dyno for not being accurate. Yeah. Any wins or roller rockers to avoid? Yeah, I think that a lot of the inexpensive ones are probably not good. I've had good luck with the Harlan Sharp stuff. All of the Comp Gold and Crane Gold stuff I've had good luck with. The Ford Racing stuff, which Crane probably did for them. I don't know if I've tried Yellow Terra ones, if they make them for Fords. I don't know if I don't remember testing those. Maybe, I don't know if I've run Scorpion ones or like Speedmaster ones. I'm pretty impressed with the longevity of factory stuff. 350,000 miles is in a not friendly environment. That seems like a lot to ask of stuff, of electronic stuff in hot environments and vibration prone environments, which is terrible for electronic stuff. Not a good sitch. So we're at 51.49. 51's on the yes side now. Wow, we had a big switchover. Does a dyno test give you real world results? 51%. Just kind of right at the 50-50 level. I'm curious about the Castech versus non-Castechs as well. We know that some 706s fail. Hopefully the same isn't true for the 243s. I just spent over $1,000 for porting larger valves. Now, were all the 862 heads that came after first of all, my question is, did they make 862s and 706s at the same time? And did they make Castech and non-Castech versions of both of those heads? And if they did, were whatever the bad ones are of the 706s, were the 862s also bad? So just like our question with the 243s and 799s, do we have bad versions of the 862s as well? How do you tell if you have a 28 ounce or 50 ounce 302? You can look at the back of the balancer and see the back of a 50 ounce 302 balancer has a really big weight on it, much bigger than the 28 ounce does. Yellow Terra rockers were in the early LS motors. Do you mean that they made them for the early LS motors? We tested those on LSs. I didn't remember ever testing any on the Ford. I've run their stuff on LSs way back. And we ran comp stuff early on too. But again, like when we tested the rockers, because every small block Chevy and big block Chevy and small block Ford, big block Ford and Dodge and all of those as a matter of like principle, I guess. All of those got roller rockers on them. And we like the aluminum ones, but we ran a lot of the stainless stuff and then ran into valve float issues with some of those heavier rockers. The aluminum rockers were better. And then cam profiles being a big culprit here for valve train stability. And then having enough spring rate too, and having the right spring rate, the right frequency. Richard, the only bad 862s people seem to talk about are the early units with the service notch. Those seem to be bad. Yeah, the gasket issue, I've seen that, but I just wondered if any of them cracked like the 706 heads are supposed to. There's 4 pieces of manifold if bought as a complete kit. I have 3 pieces already ported out, but I cannot find the top lid piece separate, unlike any other part for the ultra low RAM manifolds. Do they not sell the lid separately? Is that their problem? Did you buy the 3 pieces used or something? And is it a flat kind of lid? Can you make it? But isn't the ultra low RAM has a weird lid because it's part of the throttle flange, right? Throttle body flange. Holy Ultraman Low RAM. Ultraman, one of my favorite shows from back in the day. Holly 300-923. It looks like they have it at Summit Racing. Let's see if they have it in stock. Let's see. Estimated ship date November 1st. Oh, except for that's a Coyote. That doesn't really do you any good, right? Near. How low can you go? Got them fancy burst panels, huh? One more minute. I bought the double rail lower plenum on sale over the summer. Cannot say. Oh, Richard. Oh, blue collar. I cannot say I've heard of any cases of the 862s failing. I'm sure there's some. Have these anything enough yet? Haven't seen similar issues. I've seen the cracks in the 706s. We've run them anyways. When we get a crack in between the cracks I've seen are between the valves, and we run them anyways. Is it true GT40P heads don't like 34 degrees of total timing? I don't know. We just advance the timing until it stops making power. I'd have to go back and look at the head test to see how much timing it wanted. What usually is used on the dyno to check AFR are the same what we're using on the street cars. Yeah, we usually have two sensors. The dyno has one. I don't remember if that's an NTK or and then we use the one that comes with the Holly normally too. So we normally use two of them. Do you know if anyone? Oh, most people on the net say no more than 30. Just want to get your thoughts. Yeah, I don't know about thoughts. I've never seen a small block Ford that only wants 30 degrees of timing. Let's see if it's in the notes on these things. What it would want for power with enough octane is usually different than what guys would be running on the street anyway, because it might be running into detonation before they're running into an optimum amount of timing. GT40X stock Windsor Junior. Stroker. I think we ran on a 331 or something. Big head test. Wait a second here. I know that we ran a P hit. That was not a GT40X. It's showing 34 on the. This is on a carbureted one. Got a Gen 3 LQ4. Is that a good engine? Yes, it is. Should I sell it and go for a newer LQ9? Did they make a Gen 3 LQ9? 2002, 2007. Okay. And it's not off topic. It can be whatever you want. But what are you trying to do with your LQ9? You know of anybody who used a Jessel small block Chevy timing belt with a Jessel cam adapter washer to get cam signal? I don't know of anybody that's done that. Richard, I think you have to view the log with the Holly X3 download program. Okay. Want to do a 408 stroker? No, you're fine. For the stroker, you have the block, and that's all that you need. You're good. And on that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up, but I will see you guys all tonight.